The rhythmic thud of the mallet against the timber echoed across the valley. Noah swung the heavy tool with a steady, practiced motion, driving a massive peg deep into the frame. His palms were mapped with ridges of hardened skin, each one a record of the months spent carving this impossible skeleton. He paused, the mallet resting against his thigh, and took a breath that felt like swallowing dry dust. The valley floor was cracked, the earth split into jagged polygons that crunched under his boots. Above, the sky was a relentless, burning blue, offering no shade and no promise of relief. He reached up to wipe the salt from his eyes, his fingers leaving streaks of grit across his forehead. The structure towered over him, a skeletal giant of beams and pitch, rising toward a horizon that remained stubbornly empty. He did not look for rain, he did not look for shade. He simply turned back to the wood, aligned the next beam, and raised the mallet again. The work was the only reality that mattered. He struck the peg once, twice, 3 times, the sound ringing out like a heartbeat in the silence of the parched landscape. The sound of laughter drifted across the field, thin and sharp against the heavy heat. A group of neighbors gathered at the edge of the construction site, their shadows long and distorted on the parched ground. They pointed at the sky, then at the towering frame, shaking their heads with rhythmic, mocking gestures. One man picked up a jagged stone and tossed it. It struck the timber with a dull thud, leaving a white mark on the dark wood. Noah did not look up. He kept his eyes fixed on the gap between 2 primary supports, his thumb pressing firmly against the wood. He reached for a bucket of thick, black sealant, his movements slow and deliberate. He dipped his brush and began to coat the seam. The neighbors stepped closer, their faces twisted in derision. But Noah simply stepped into the shadow of the hull. He wiped his brow with a rough sleeve, turned his back to the crowd, and drove another peg into place. Noah dipped the brush for the final time, the black resin thick and viscous as tar. He spread it across the last exposed seam, his movements precise, ensuring every gap was filled against the coming water. He pressed his palm against the wood, feeling the heat radiate from the timber, and then he pulled his hand away, leaving a dark smear on the grain. The mallet was set aside, its head heavy and stained with dust. He stood back, surveying the massive hull. It was finished. The structure stood solid, a silent monolith against the unrelenting sun. He exhaled, a long, slow breath that seemed to carry the weight of his years of labor. Then, the shift occurred. It was not a sound, but the absence of one. The wind that had been scouring the valley for months simply ceased. The dry rustle of the grass died instantly. High above, the birds that had circled the valley for days banked sharply and vanished into the glare. The air grew thick, pressing against his skin with a sudden, heavy humidity. Noah stood motionless, listening to the void. The preparation was over. The horizon bruised into a deep, sickly purple, casting long, unnatural shadows across the valley floor. Noah did not wait for the sky to answer the change. He walked to the massive gate of the ark and pulled the heavy latch, the iron hinges screaming in the sudden stillness. He stepped out, and the first of the animals appeared from the tree line. They moved in pairs, a steady, rhythmic procession that defied the chaos of nature. The neighbors, who had been jeering only moments before, fell silent. Their laughter withered, replaced by a collective, uneasy shifting of feet. They watched as the creatures entered the dark maw of the hull, their eyes wide and fixed on the structure. Noah moved among them, his hands steady, guiding the animals with a firm, wordless rhythm. He did not look at the crowd. He looked only at the path ahead. A low, rhythmic tremor began to pulse through the soles of his boots, vibrating up through his legs. It grew in intensity, a deep, guttural thrum that rattled the tools left on his workbench. The ground beneath the neighbor's feet began to shudder, throwing dust into the air. The mockery was gone, replaced by a heavy, suffocating dread. The sky deepened to an impossible shade of violet, and the animals continued their march, 2 by 2, into the belly of the ark. Noah stood at the threshold, his gaze locked on the horizon, waiting for the final signal. The last of the creatures crossed the threshold, their hooves clicking against the wood before vanishing into the interior darkness. Noah stepped back, his boots finding purchase on the threshold. Then, the sky shattered. It did not begin with a drizzle or a warning. The heavens split open, dumping water in solid, heavy sheets that hammered the valley floor with the force of a falling wall. In seconds, the dry, cracked earth vanished. Dust turned to mud, and mud turned to a churning brown river that roared as it surged against the hull. The neighbors, who had stood frozen in disbelief, finally broke. They scrambled toward the higher ground of the hills, but the water rose with a terrifying, unnatural speed, cutting off their path and swirling around their waists. Noah watched the world disappear into the deluge, the familiar landmarks of the valley erased by the rising tide. He reached for the heavy door, his fingers locking onto the iron latch. The wood groaned under the immense pressure of the water slamming against the exterior. He braced his feet, his muscles straining against the weight of the gale, and pulled. The pressure against the door was immense, a relentless force trying to force its way into the sanctuary. Noah leaned his entire weight into the wood, his boots slipping on the wet deck as the water surged higher. He grunted, his knuckles white as he forced the heavy frame forward. The hinges resisted, screaming against the weight of the water. Just as the gap narrowed, a massive wave slammed into the hull. The entire structure lurched violently, throwing Noah sideways. He caught himself on the doorframe, his breath hitching as the floor tilted at a sharp, sickening angle. The Ark groaned. He did not hesitate. He lunged forward, slamming his shoulder into the door and driving the iron bolt home. The latch clicked into place, a final, sharp sound that cut through the roar. Inside, the sudden absence of the wind was jarring. The Ark shuddered again, lifted by a powerful surge. He stood in the dark, listening to the world drift away. The roar outside became a constant, dull vibration that seeped through the thick timber walls. Inside, the air was heavy, thick with the scent of damp straw and the restless, rhythmic shifting of the animals. Noah moved through the gloom, his hands tracing the familiar grain of the support beams to maintain his balance as the vessel pitched in the dark. He reached the center of the hold and knelt by his workbench. A single oil lamp flickered, its flame dancing wildly as the Ark rolled with the swell. He shielded the light with his palm, watching the shadows stretch and retreat against the curved hull. The wick sputtered, the light dipping low until the room was nearly swallowed by the black. He trimmed the carbon, the flame steadying into a weak, yellow glow that barely touched the corners of the space. Hours bled into days, marked only by the constant, agonizing groan of the wood and the splashing of water against the exterior. He monitored the depth markers he had carved into the floorboards, his eyes burning from the lack of sleep. Every time the vessel tilted, he braced his weight against the wall, listening to the chaotic turbulence of the deep. There was only the rhythmic thrum of the storm and the fragile, flickering light of the lamp holding back the absolute void. The violent, rhythmic pitching that had defined life for weeks ceased without warning. The Ark groaned one final time, a long, deep vibration that traveled through the floorboards and up into Noah's boots. Then, a harsh, grinding sound erupted from beneath the hull as the vessel scraped against solid ground. The sudden halt threw Noah forward. He caught the edge of the workbench, his knuckles bruising against the wood. Silence rushed in, heavy and absolute. He stood still, listening, but the only sound was the drip of water from the timber seams. He moved toward the gate, his muscles stiff. He gripped the iron latch, the metal cold and slick with condensation. With a sharp pull, he forced the heavy door outward. A gust of sharp, biting air flooded the hold, smelling of wet stone. He stepped onto the threshold. The valley was gone. The first light of a new sun touched the horizon, casting a pale, golden glow. Noah stood on the deck, staring out at a world entirely transformed. Noah remained on the deck, a singular figure against the vast, mud-slicked silence of the mountain. The Ark sat behind him, its heavy beams and sealed seams serving as a monument to a choice made long before the first drop of rain fell. This story does not end with the receding waters. It persists as a mirror for the present. We often look at the remnants of such accounts as mere history, yet the core lesson lies not in the destruction, but in the deliberate act of preparation. When the familiar ground beneath our feet begins to shift, and the structures of our daily lives show their first cracks, the question is not about the intensity of the storm. It is about what we have built to weather it. The Ark was never just wood and pitch. It was the physical manifestation of a decision made while the sky was still clear and the neighbors were still laughing. Today, we face our own modern uncertainties, our own gathering clouds that remain invisible to the unprepared. The challenge is simple, yet demanding. Are we standing on the shore, merely watching the horizon for the first sign of the storm, or are we currently in the field, hammer in hand, busy building the vessel that will carry us through?